Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, is the Senate in a quorum call?
No.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise this afternoon to say a few words about a colleague, a friend, a mentor, and a man that I admire very, very much and have so much respect for, my colleague, Senator Hatch. You know, in Pennsylvania, as in many states, along the sides of the roads in various towns, you often see these commemorating plaques of historically significant places. In Pennsylvania, there are these beautiful cast aluminum. They're painted blue, there's gold lettering, and they tell you something unique about little boroughs, towns, villages, or sometimes sites in big cities all across the Commonwealth. There is such a commemoration at the house where Betsy Ross made the first American flag. There is a marker that signifies the spot where President Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. There's the site of the first World Series in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, I'm not a member of the commission that makes the decision about these things, but if I were, I think you could make a great case for a current and unique Pennsylvania success story. Many of my colleagues already know Chairman Hatch is actually a son of Pennsylvania. He began with very humble roots in the great city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he attended McGibney Elementary School and grew up in a hardscrabble neighborhood. He developed an amazing tenacity, which we've all seen and come to know, that has stayed with him to this day. As a matter of fact, my understanding is the tenacity was started at an early age. I understand there was one season when a young Orrin Hatch on the Baldwin High basketball team managed to foul out 15 times in one season. Pretty tough and tenacious guy on the basketball court he was. But he wasn't just a good athlete. The city of Pittsburgh helped to nurture in Orrin Hatch his love for music. He was a regular attendee at, among other things, the symphony orchestra at the old Syria Mosque in Oakland, which I like to think contributed a little bit to his lifelong love of music. He was a hardworking guy from the beginning. In high school, then Orrin Hatch worked his summers as a woodlather. He was a card-carrying member of the AFL-CIO, and the modest income he earned from that job helped put him through school. But if you had to pick one place to put the marker that would be calling attention to this wonderful son of Pennsylvania, it might actually be a chicken coop in the Pittsburgh area. Because while he was struggling to make ends meet right after college, Orrin Hatch renovated the chicken coop in his parents' backyard, turned it into a little two-room cottage, and that's where he lived with his young family. That's where they scraped by while he was attending the University of Pittsburgh Law School on a scholarship. The future Chairman Hatch graduated from that law school and practiced law in Pittsburgh for 7 years and was recognized as a formidable attorney in Pittsburgh, in western Pennsylvania, before leaving to Utah, where he would ultimately launch what then looked improbable, but turned into this enormously successful career in government. Of course, the challenge, if you were going to put one of these markers up, is what would you say? There's just so much to say about Chairman Hatch. It's hard to encapsulate his success in this body, certainly on a marker or even in a speech. But let me try to touch on a few of the high points. It's amazing how long he has been so accomplished in this great body. Before I even graduated from college, Senator Hatch had already worked to successfully pass one of the initiatives for which he has become well known. You know, in medicine, as the president knows, We have a term called orphan conditions. This just really refers to very rare diseases, diseases that afflict fewer than 200,000 Americans. And while they're narrow in the scope of any particular disease, cumulatively, they do affect quite a significant number of Americans. There are conditions like cystic fibrosis, multiple myeloma, and ALS. And because any one of these orphan conditions affects relatively few people, the economics of developing treatment for them really didn't work. And from 1973 to 1983, the FDA actually only approved 10 orphan therapies over 10 years for all of the hundreds and hundreds of orphan diseases that afflicted millions of people cumulatively. Well, Senator Hatch recognized this problem. And as chairman of the Committee on Labor and Human Resources, which was the predecessor to the Health Committee, Senator Hatch worked across chambers and across the aisle with Representative Henry Waxman. And in 1983, they passed the Orphan Drug Act, and it increased the incentives for developing drugs for these rare but really problematic conditions. And since that time, there have literally been hundreds and hundreds of orphan products that have been approved. They've come on the markets. And while that law has been updated over the years to reflect changing technology and changing dynamics in medicine, the fact is the Orphan Drug Act that Senator Hatch authored as a relatively new senator has undoubtedly had a profound difference in saving lives and improving the quality of lives for millions of Americans who previously had little or no hope. That's a very, very big deal. And the very next year, Chairman Hatch achieved passage of another really monumental law in the healthcare space. It's officially called the Drug Price Competition and Patient Term Restoration Act, but everybody around here simply refers to it as Hatch-Waxman. And this is the legislation that really laid the foundation for the generic drug industry that we see today. And really, when you think about this, this has been an astonishing, really revolutionary innovation that has been enormously helpful for American consumers. You go back to 1984, and only about 19% of all the drugs dispensed in America were generic. Over 80% were branded drugs, and that's important because branded drugs are vastly more expensive than generic drugs. Well, by 2017, largely as a result of the legislation that Senator Hatch authored, that dynamic had completely flipped. In fact, it had more than flipped. By 2017, branded drugs are less than 15% of all the drugs dispensed, and generic drugs, the low-cost alternative, are over 85% of all the medicines dispensed in America. This one change alone results in saving American families billions of dollars a year on their healthcare costs. But the list of Senator Hatch's accomplishments is a very, very long one, and I couldn't go through all of it. I couldn't begin to, but again, just to touch on some of the other big ones. There's the creation of the Children's Health Insurance Program. There's the passage of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. All of this happened before I got to the Senate, many years ago. And then in 2010, I was elected to the Senate, and I had this wonderful privilege shortly thereafter, and that was a privilege of working on the Senate Finance Committee with Senator Hatch as our chairman and our leader. And it was a privilege for me for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is I've had a chance to see up close, in person, firsthand, his leadership style, how effective he has. I mean, he's a role model for anyone who wants to have a successful career as a U.S. Senator. Tremendously productive. His work to repeal Medicare's flawed sustainable growth rate, which year after year plagued health care. There seemed to be no solution, but Senator Hatch figured that out. He was principally responsible for crafting and passing the Chronic Care Act, and anybody in the Senate could learn a lot from his focus on oversight of our nation's foster care system, as well as his role in shaping the Finance Committee's response to the prescription drug abuse and the opioid crisis. It's a very, very long list of really, really important reforms and innovations in healthcare. But it's not just healthcare. Probably what I think will be one of Senator Hatch's most lasting legacies is the leadership he provided to make it possible for all of us to pass the most comprehensive tax reform in over 30 years. Our tax code was broken for a long time. Without Senator Hatch's leadership of the Finance Committee, it would still be broken today. But instead, he helped us to take an outdated, uncompetitive tax code and transform it into a competitive, pro-growth tax code, bringing down our corporate rate to 21%, reversing the trend of companies moving headquarters abroad, reforming our international tax rules to encourage investment domestically, allowing business to immediately write off capital investment. That has already and will continue to lead to a surge of investment, which enhances worker productivity, which is a necessary precondition for wage growth, which we are now seeing. These are the fruits of Senator Hatch's labors. He insisted that we lower taxes at every income level, so virtually all Americans save on their federal tax bill, and the result has been one of the strongest economy in over a decade, by many measures much longer than that. Consumer confidence at an 18-year high. For the first time that I know of in American history, we have more job openings in America than there are people looking for jobs in America. Unemployment benefit claims hitting a 45-year low. In fact, unemployment is the lowest it's been since 1969. I mean, these are unbelievable numbers. African American unemployment, all-time record low. Hispanic unemployment, record low. Youth unemployment, a 50-year low. And as a result of all this demand for workers, average hourly earnings are rising at the highest year-over-year increase in a decade. Mr. President, that story is true and was made possible by Senator Hatch. It was roughly 50 years ago when the Hatch family left Pennsylvania for Utah. That was our loss. It was a big gain for Utah. They gained a great man, a good man, a future statesman. But I will insist that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania deserves to take a lot of pride in having contributed, at least, in helping to shape this good, kind, decent, honorable, and extremely influential man in his life. So, Mr. President, I want to give my personal thanks to Senator Hatch for his leadership, for the fact that he has been such a good and honorable man. He enhances the reputation of this body, and he has set a great example for all of us to follow. I wish my friend and mentor a very, very long and happy retirement. I yield the floor.